Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this afternoon session. I'm here to introduce Tim Leach, and anyone who was here this morning got a chance to hear a few brief comments by Tim. Tim is the Director of Affordability, Competitive Excellence, and Knowledge Management. It's an enormous title, tall guy. He's my customer at Northrop Grumman in Los Angeles. And Tim's kind of an interesting story. When we first went to speak with Northrop Grumman, I think one of the reasons we came in is because we were on an approved list of vendors. And you gave us a look because you didn't have to go through a lot of rigmarole to get us approved because they're a defense contractor. But Tim brought up a slide that was his vision for what he wanted to accomplish at Northrop Grumman. And you're going to see this, and I think it came up this morning as well. And on that slide, he has what he called the wheel, which are a whole series of knowledge management functions surrounding an individual, a user. And when he explained this to me, in the first few minutes I started smiling because I'd worked for Nimbus long enough to know that we did a lot of those things he was looking for. And I knew the challenge was to convince him without sounding like a sales guy. And I'm a consultant, I'm not a sales guy. And but then Tim went further and he said, what I really want to do is create this knowledge management system that I can then leverage the social technologies around. I want people to look at content and I want them to say whether they found what they were looking for, to give numerical scores. I want owners of content to be notified when thresholds are met. And so Tim actually started my wheels turning in a way that actually affected the development of the TIBCO product, or the Nimbus, now TIBCO product. And there aren't a lot of customers that I can say actually moved us like that. But in a year, right up until the acquisition of Nimbus by TIBCO, we were moving a lot of the ways that I would call the Tim Leach direction. So with that, I'm going to let Tim talk. Welcome, Tim.
Is there a remote here?
Right there. That's it.
That was a heck of an introduction to follow. Welcome. Glad to see so many people are still here this afternoon. I said I didn't know how to exactly handle a conference in London, whether or not everybody would leave after lunch and go out and enjoy the town, but maybe this is an indication most of you are from here and you know what traffic's like. Little bit of history, and I think Chris had kind of set the stage here. I've been a couple of the presentations leading up to this. A lot of really good presentations about what they've done. We're really at the beginning of this thing. We've done very little in terms of our work with Nimbus. It's about a year into it, but I think some of the numbers I heard, this is a 5-year plus journey. So I don't have a lot to share in terms of how we've transitioned with Nimbus, but I'll kind of set the stage for it. I believe we're all very much alike, and we're in a situation today where our companies are flexing quite often. And this is just to give you an idea. We're everything from Newport News, that was a shipbuilding company, to Ryan Aircraft. Ryan was involved with some of the first like Spirit of St. Louis, airplanes like that. So you go down through this list and you see the legacies that have come together, and every one of these came together with a very proud heritage. They didn't want to change. And that's consistent. We continue on. There's been others. Since that 2002 timeframe, we've probably brought in about 9 what we now refer to as our SBUs. And again, an example of one of those SBUs would be Scaled Composites. Burt Rutan's company should be familiar with that one. It's another one of the leaders in the aerospace field. And so these smaller companies we're bringing into here, it's the same story. It's a matter of how we manage the integration of these companies, how we bring ourselves together as fast as possible, how we take advantage of the scale of these now larger and growing companies, but more important, how we leverage the real, the social intelligence, if you will, that exists out there amongst all of these different employees. So you can kind of see Northrop Grumman, rather large company, $28 billion in sales. We're talking about Fortune companies this morning. We're about a Fortune 78, I think it is. 75,000 employees, was about 120,000, but we just spun off that shipbuilding for some very strategic reasons. And we're spread out every state in the United States and across the world. We're in 25 different countries. So that's a challenge to get us all on the same page. And we have a premise that we're going to do it one way, one process owner, and that there's very little variance allowed to that. So I would never say that there's only one way, because we have not succeeded at that. But that's the premise in which we operate, as one way to do business. So I'm with the aerospace systems group, aerospace sector. That's a recent transition. It's one where we brought together the air side of Northrop Grumman. Some platforms might sound familiar, like the B-2, the Joint Strike Fighter, Global Hawk. Brought that together with the space side. Again, spacecraft, satellites, ones that are out there right now. Chandra, part of the Hubble program, working on James Webb satellite. These are all very technical satellite programs. And in both of those instances, we're a company that starts thinking about something, and then about 15 years later, you see it. And that's a challenge to take all the way from your development, your concept, all the way through development into production before we ever even get into deploying it 15 years. So think about the Joint Strike Fighter. It's probably one that's familiar to most of you here in the room. That's at least 15 years. At least 15 years that we were talking about that platform. So maintaining the thoughts that went into it 15 years ago, retaining the knowledge, keeping track of the people who worked on that for those 15 years is a challenge. And it's part of when we started talking to Nimbus, we weren't just interested in a process that was on paper and that got vaulted into a notebook and set on a shelf. We were looking for something that had a life to it. And it had to be something that anybody that touched it, any changes that were made, they had to be recorded. And it was very difficult for us to manage that through the paper systems. So again, Nimbus became interesting kind of story. I think it's pretty close to what Chris had said, but being the Northrop guy, I can change it a little bit. It was actually, we were looking to go build a system to do what we were thinking of. And when we started looking at systems we could shut down and take credit for, Nimbus was already in our servers. And we said, well, there's a system. It's got process management written on it. Let's look at shutting that down. And I'll get to here in a minute why we chose not to shut it down, but actually to embrace it and to make it the cornerstone of our path forward. So in and about the 2008 timeframe, this decision to bring these two together, you can see we had been down the same path. I think many of you have been. We had tried every process improvement type initiative that we could. We had, at the time of this coming together, again, about 7,000 employees that were trained. And, we'd work programs with the state of California, for example, where they paid our employees to go to school, and we had 3,000 employees go through classes just in the state of California. And again, this is 7,000 people just in this 23,000. So, of course, when I presented this slide the first time, our president said, so what are they doing for me? I hear about it. I've paid a lot of money. I know I've got a lot of people trained, but I don't see anything happening from this. So, we took everything leading up to that point, and we really set out on this vision that said we need to get to this point where we use the word agile, and I know that has a little conflict in the software world, flexible, nimble, right? Pick the word. The reason being that take satellites today. I talked about a 15-year development cycle. Today we have our customer coming to us and saying, I need a satellite and I need it in a year. I can't wait 15 years. We still have that customer that's willing to wait the 15 years. Two completely different platforms, but they're integrated now. They work very closely together. We're working on some programs today. They call them like wideband relay satellite. It's a premise that you'll surround the globe with these satellites, small, again, 1.5, 2-year development type programs, and that they'll basically provide this high-speed data interface that all of these unmanned vehicles that are up there flying and communicating with all of our troops on the ground, that this will be all like a high-speed data interchange network in the sky. You think about that, we didn't have the processes to go do that. So we had said, well, if we're going to compete in that marketplace, and we know that's the direction that the world is going, we're going to have to get more agile. So, again, started looking at systems, started looking at opportunities. How do we get the collective intelligence of these 23,000 people around the United States and the world working together? And looking at different systems, we initially said, we'll go build one. And I think the term is mashup. we were working with many legacy systems we already had in the KM world. We were working with some IBM systems, some Oracle systems, many others, and it was not working. So again, I'll kind of talk a little bit more about Nimbus and how we picked that. And then the next step was getting into these operating models. And for us, that was going and picking, we chose 9. We're on a path of the first one, that one being a rapid development program. So we've taken, again, a company that traditionally takes many years to do something, and we're now focusing on changing that command media for that application that's going to require like a 1-year design and build. And there's some examples just been put out there by us using this process. Make sure I get the program right. If I say it wrong, I might be in trouble. I think it's Firebird. So there's a couple that sound the same that, can talk about some, can talk about others. But Firebird. And Firebird's a platform that has unique capabilities. It looks a lot like the Reaper or some of these other unmanned drones that are up there flying. But this is one that actually we can put a pilot in it, or we can take that pilot out. The advantage of that is there are places we are not allowed to fly unmanned aircraft. So in those instances, we can throw the pilot in it, move it through that airspace, and then when we get into a situation where we need an unmanned situation, we can move that pilot out. That was done in about a year, 18 months total to get it out and fielded. Because we did it in 18 months, we now have a contract to go build those. So that's an example of how taking this approach, taking our command media, we call it command media, I apologize, I've heard it called SOPs, policies, procedures, those documents that you use to run your business on, we are now categorizing those into these operating models or business models. I like to think of like Apple as an example. Apple has many different business models. They started out in computers. They matured into stores. If you could have imagined them trying to use the same SOPs to run the stores they were using to build computers, that's what we were doing. We were into satellites, we were into quick response, we were into all these things, and we always insisted on using the same SOPs. It was just a legacy of somebody who, before me, had said, we're always going to do it the same way. So moving towards this operating model, the corporate architecture is our way in through an inventory of processes that we've now got the whole corporation to talk to each other. So before, I'll give you an example, a program called BAMS, Broad Area Maritime Surveillance. It's a Navy program. We were sharing work between New York, Melbourne, Florida, Rancho Bernardo, California, and El Segundo, California, and they split that work up. And one group said, we'll do software requirements. The other group said, we'll do software design. And we missed the budget by $200 million because we forgot software documentation. So it's easy to talk about these processes, but without that framework, we had missed a significant part of that statement of work. Now, we were fortunate. We were so far underbid on that program that the customer gave us an opportunity to come back and provide a second bid. We won that one as well, but it's just an example of why it was so important to get these processes articulated and in what I think we all refer to as a SIPOC, or an input-output, and be able to define that process very clearly, which gave us an opportunity when we talked across the world, we were always talking about the same process. And we talked about best practices, we were always talking about best practices for the same process. And again, that was leading us towards this agility, which was, depending on what the customer asked for, we'd be able to respond to it, both in terms of cost, in terms of customization, and in terms of schedule. Okay? So, as we started working on these operating models, the first thing we realized that over the years, and we had this list of processes in one part of our company since mid-90s, that we had not done a very good job of putting the governance in place that helped us to understand how those documents should be written or how they should be organized. So what we took on is trying to fix 25 years of bad mistakes and bad habits was taking our process framework and actually putting some criteria in place that what we called a category of processes, or the process grouping, or when we finally got down to a process. So I think we have John in here from APQC, right? APQC. So if anybody's familiar with the work that APQC is doing, this is a part of that. We've taken a lot of we've learned a lot from APQC. We've made some changes to our structure and put more formality in place. Just to give you an example, we now have what we call a category. At a category level, we write a policy. That's where we write our shall. So if an employee is looking for a shall statement, it's only going to be found in the category. Where we have the process grouping, we write our requirements. So anything that requires the processes below that, we write those. It could come from our contracts. It could come from me. I could make a statement that says I want everybody to do something a certain way. I would write it in my requirements. And then the process starts at our level 3 of that process listing. And then level 4 and below starts getting into the less informal work instructions type activities. And then, again, we call command media, or we call it command media. It's our policies, procedures, work instructions. We created clear alignment for that. What we found once we created that alignment was that we had policies at the 4th and 5th tier levels of our processes. And somebody would ask, why do you have a policy that's written so discreetly down here for something so small? And I think, one, it's because we could. Nobody had told them they couldn't. The other was people like to hide things. So what we really found out of this was the assessment, causal analysis, was all of our documents had been written for auditors. So, this isn't fair to ask this question, but has anybody ever failed an ISO audit? Okay, all right, so yeah, that's fair that somebody has. I mean, we've had observations and we've had failures, but I mean, they haven't come out and said, okay, we'll be back when you get this thing cleaned up. It's never been that. But how many people have process failures day in and day out? That's what we have. So we have these process failures going on. Nobody raised their hand on that one. That was pretty good. We have these process failures going on, yet we're able to get through our audits. And in fact, we have an audit system that's designed to pass audits. And we prep for audits. And I hope this all sounds familiar. I hope we're not the only ones. Because, our livelihood relies on those certifications. And the last thing we could do, we talk about we could not afford to be, disbarred from this government work because we lose our certification. So we have focused all of our energy around documents. And when the auditor comes in, we have a very clear path to direct them to those auditing documents. And I think some of the reasons we had buried some of these is because you didn't want them going into everything. And we're CMMI certified as well. And I can tell you I've found instances where the CMMI group prepped our auditors to not look into this system. They gave them a little bucket of documents to look at, and it was like, don't look at anything else because, you won't like what you find. So part of this was, full disclosure just to ourselves saying, this is a mess. This isn't going to be easy to fix. We're about 6 months to a year into it. Tom is working with us. We have Tom working with us, Tom from Nimbus here. Molyneux. He's actually on our site. Tom has dug into a few of those procedures. One of my favorite ones is a procedure that when he brought it up, it was 3 processes that had no relationship to each other, not connected, not in and out. And you would expect a procedure when somebody went there, it would be something that's, there's the input and here's the output. That one had 3 different inputs and outputs. But it was something that obviously over the years an auditor had a finding. We said, we'll fix that. We wrote one more thing into the document. And the challenge was it did not really improve that process, but it answered the finding. So when the auditor would show up next time, we'd say, we have that solved. Here's what's in our documents. So we struggled, and I think everybody that's working with Nimbus today would agree that is the type of thing that Nimbus is doing for us. That's right now we see that as the number one solution to getting structure. If we were starting fresh, I don't think we'd be as bad as we are today. I think that's a luxury that anybody who's starting a new company starts with a Nimbus. I don't think many of us are new companies in here, so maybe it doesn't appeal to you. But if you were a new company starting today, Nimbus would be a great place to start. But that was not us at all. So we had all of these things that you see out here were stored in different places, different systems. Some were not used. Again, because the employees find a way to get their jobs done, and they're pretty good at that. They fill the white space, so if we don't tell them how to do it, they'll find a way to do it. So this is really where we started. We said, well, let's take all these systems and put them onto this wheel, if that's the right word, the wheel, and let's figure out where all of our process information's at. And this was our path. And so if you take like our agility models up there, WBS, OBS, again, work breakdown structures, organizational breakdown structures, our framework, looking at it by life cycle, looking at it by bill of material, looking at it by the process inputs and output, looking at its relationship to enterprise architecture. That was huge. And that right there, I think, is a lifetime of work if you can go slay that dragon right there. But that's where we really started. And then we said, so what are the things that relate to that? And I'll just give you an example. Our knowledge management, we have some very stable legacy knowledge management systems that are out there that employees use every day, especially in the space side. They were always having conversations with each other on our forums about some situation they had found with thermals related to the propulsion system on some type of a satellite. It wasn't something I'd read, but it was nonetheless, it was something the engineers were very proud of and something they used on a regular basis. And so we started talking about, well, somehow those relate to a process. And if I'm in there looking for those things, I could never find them. It was hard for me to find them. And we had a search tool, but search is getting better, but by no means was search ready. So it was difficult to find. And you'd have these lifetime of articles, almost like in blogs. And the people that wrote them might know how to get to them, but I was struggling to find something when somebody would point me there, and some conversations led us to believe that it was really hard to use. So we said, well, maybe if we started tagging each of those items with the process that it relates to. So when it's for the design of an array system, on a solar panel, on a certain satellite, that's a process. And how do we tag that? So that was kind of where we started, was getting to the knowledge management. Then the other was the conversation I said about processes and just how bad they were. We started talking about, well, how do we get feedback for our processes? Today, we have the typical PDF files or Word document files stored online, and that process is very laborious. You want to send a note to somebody, you can. You probably won't get a response. But that was one place we looked, was how can we get the process owners, because again, there's one process owner for each one of those processes. How do we get that process owner engaged with the process user so that when the process user notes something, they have a feedback mechanism. So as an example in that one, we coined the word Process 360, but we said, well, imagine for a minute if when the process owner is in that process area, they can actually make a comment to that process, and then it goes through a workflow and they get feedback on that process. So again, that was one of the paths we took. The other was, imagine if you had these different questions you could ask, and depending on the answers, the auditors, now looking for something to go look for, would go, well, let's go see what kind of answers they're getting back. If they're poor answers, in other words, the process isn't easy to use, it's hard to follow, more than likely that's a good place to go start an audit. And so, we took on the compliance side of this thing. The other was, again, the ability to build these workflows in the tool. The tools, we've had situations before where ITs come in to save money, and IT has shut a system down, and then 2 years later we're still collecting the cost because we didn't exactly know what processes that IT system supported. And when we shut it down, it really took us years to figure out, okay, here's all the places that affected. And we have an example of one that was about a $20 million error. Took almost a year for them to figure out why things weren't working. We'd lost all the data associated with it. For them to go rebuild that database took about $20 million. So part of this was then how do we get the tools? The RSS was, if I have somebody soldering, again, in some of these areas you're soldering on these boards that an error can mean tens of thousands, if not upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars for that board. And I'll give you an example. In the things they send up into space have all these thermal considerations, and you have to basically take a block of titanium this big, and they kind of hog out or take all of the metal out of that thing, because if they built it out of individual pieces, when it gets up to 2 degrees Kelvin, it grows and shrinks in different directions, and that's enough to make the boards inside shift. So it's pretty cool stuff, but you can't make a mistake. I mean, that's the challenge. So if somebody had just observe something over here, it can take us months to get that message out to everybody that something had just been discovered and you need to go check your stock, you need to go figure out what's going on. And again, too many examples of how it took us months to go figure that out. So we said, well, what if we could do an RSS feed so that people can subscribe to a process that they perform and they'll get a little like BlackBerry message or something will pop up on their screen that says, hey, something just happened over here in one of the labs and you need to start watching for this. So it was a way of getting instantaneous. In fact, what we were looking for out of that was, how do I get feedback from the right people that said, I've read that? All right, that was the next thing. So you kind of keep going around this thing. You know, some of these things I think are more obvious than others. But as we were looking at this, that's about the time that, you know, we were looking at, well, if we did all this, where are all these systems and how do we shut those systems down and how we create this mashup and put them all into one massive system, and who do we have that's smart enough that could build that anyway? And that was, it took us about 6 months to a year. We started with one company. I don't know if it's okay to...
Provision.
Well, I was going to use their initials, but it was OpenText, Provision. And we started with them, and it was a very painful experience. I don't blame them, I blame us, because we just went so far in the wrong direction. They were the wrong tool, wrong reasons, but we wasted about 6 months. So we came back to this thing, and in each one of these, I'm getting emotional going, I know we can do this. I know this exists in some way or another. So we said, well, let's put this back out on the board. So I took $40,000, found somebody to help me write the SRD, started writing the SRD, and while we're looking for those companies that are those software systems we can eliminate, we really started looking at Nimbus. And at that time, it was on our servers. People were using it just to do a process map, nothing more. And as we started looking at it, we went, wait a minute. So what you see up there in red was like my first shot at this thing months ago where I said, they can do all of that right there. And that's really the biggest part of what we were trying to accomplish. We can kind of color some of these in because right out of the box, it starts to solve those problems. So again, that's where we started working with Chris to kind of put the requirements into place. I personally am very excited to hear what's going on with TIBCO. Maybe I could get shot up here by saying that, I'm not sure. But when I see the maturity that TIBCO brings to this social intelligence, I think the opportunity here is it's beyond, I don't think we know where this is going to go yet. It's kind of a dream at this point for me. We have our senior leaders now that are constantly starting to talk about the Process 360 and when are we going to have this feedback mechanism and when will we have this capability in here so that the employees have the ability to kind of rally around each other and talk. And an example there, and I oversell this, I'm guilty of that. I've told Chris I embellish a lot, so his challenges are pretty big. But we've said there's employees that tend to go to the same process areas over and over. I don't want them to sign up. I want the system to be able to take the fact that they go there over and over and then basically put them into a community of people that use that process. And then anybody who's looking for somebody else in that community can just basically do a search on, hey, who looks like me? And, it's kind of like I've said I'm challenged. I don't subscribe to LinkedIn or Facebook or any of these social applications. Yeah, yet. I've committed I'll do one today. But I live in the shadow of that, and I've watched my daughter, my wife, family members, friends, who come in and say, somebody just contacted them, and you go, how did that happen? I don't know. I'm a member of LinkedIn or whatever that may be, and they found out about me through something else. That's the opportunity that I think we've been missing in our company. That's that social intelligence that's there that we have to figure out how to take advantage of. And so I'm very positive and happy about this relationship of Nimbus and TIBCO because I believe that that's going to bring those two together. And again, I've spent a very short time out here at the booth, but it looks like there's... Is that you or me? Okay. I thought that was my 5-minute warning. I see that that's going to happen with this. And I've not seen any other products that are getting close to what even the discussions we're having, or I think where this is going. So again, I'm not a salesperson by any means. I've been doing this for way too many years. I say being a process person, zealot, geek. It's like a ship in a bottle, right? You get in, you can't get out. I mean, I'm a professional electrical engineer. I don't know what happened. I was on a path designing buildings, and next thing you know, I was doing this. But this is certainly, I think, a game changer for us in our industry because, again, we are facing the challenge. We have, I was going to use the word aging, maturing workforce in the aerospace defense industry. It's one where 50% of our employees are expected to leave the company within the next 5 years. That means we have this very flat profile of employees that are anywhere from 18 years old up to about 40 years old. They love this, right? This is, I have what we refer to as millenniums, Gen Ys in my group, more than half of them because that's where the passion's at for this. They're loving this thing. You know, they're the ones that complain that they couldn't get a hold of me. I tell them I was in the office. They say, well, you didn't answer your IM. It's like, I answered the phone. I mean, you know, that's what that's for. But so they're loving this thing. And I think they're the ones that, again, for us, if we step back, you watch, they're the ones that are embracing this, and they're taking this to new ways that I could never imagine. So I say, I really got an idea, but I really don't know where this thing's going to go. So kind of wrapping up, the opportunity we see is, we already have some examples of this ideation or collaboration that's going on around our product development. We are working with some of the universities where we are putting ideas into the university and we are just turning them loose and letting them have it. And we are getting back designs of a magnitude we could never have imagined. We participated here recently in a UAV fly-off in the UAE where we went over and provided boxes of styrofoam and materials and propellers and turned it loose to these students at one of the universities there in the UAE. And it's amazing what they did. In fact, the UAE team just won the World Championships in the UAV design. And that's, we're talking about a country that doesn't have a lot of exposure to the UAV market. But by putting them all into the same room, giving them that opportunity and just giving them the basics, they basically figured it out themselves. We're looking to go do that. I talked about it's all about efficiencies and effectiveness for us. Our customer, the Department of Defense customer, has committed to cutting $450 billion out of our defense budget over the next 10 years. That's going to be tough for us to take. We haven't figured out how we're going to accommodate that. The theme is we want more without more. Or it's another, they have many of them, the better buying power. All of those say we've got to figure out how to take these processes and we have got to figure out how to make more money. But yet we've got to give them more product. And we can't charge them more. All right, so you put all that together, it's a pretty flat sales environment. The ability to have standards and controls, and I think that's a common theme. Again, we focus on doing things right. We launch a satellite. We don't want to launch a rock. It's something that has to go up there and has to fly around for 10 to 15 years and perform its task. We're one of those that we are the ones that just launched the L-Cross. It's the one that went up, crashed into the moon. On purpose, absolutely. Yep. That wasn't a mistake. And it really happened. I mean, you got to believe that, right? It wasn't like the moon landing. We really did that. You could see it from your telescopes. And I know that's a myth, right? But anyway, being able to do that, requires us to do the right things and do them over and over and over. So we're focused on that as well. We have a large Enterprise 2.0 initiative. That's where we're looking at the major systems all the way from how we contact our customers to how we get that customer feedback and everything in between. So having a system that ties into that's essential. All of these social applications tend to have, I believe it's an XML interface or a technical term that too many consonants, not enough vowels, but it's a part of our Enterprise 2.0 approach. And then, also for us, it is about the people, process, and tools piece and the ability to tie those together. So I hope you share in my vision. I think we all kind of have dreams. This has been our dream. We're seeing it come together. I don't think we're more than about months, maybe a year off from actually seeing the fruits of this because we've seen some of the mock-ups in some of the approach that's being taken. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes with the new merger as well.